Welcome to the audio presentation of Virtuewashing versus True Altruism, the Rise of Grassroots Philanthropy. This is available for reading on LinkedIn. My name is Dr. Chris Stout. I am going to be the narrator of this and also the original author of this article. Please be sure to drill around in the show notes. We've got a variety of different kinds of resources and things that are a little bit easier in some cases to read than just to listen to. Thanks for listening. Each year, LinkedIn News asks their top voices to opine on what we speculate may be the big ideas of the upcoming year. For this year's Big Ideas special feature, I wanted to weigh in on #BigIdeas2023 with my perspective on rethinking effective altruism and the pretension of plutocratic benevolence, along with a few how-to ideas for making the world a better place in 2023. The former plague of insouciance as to charitable giving seems to have been replaced with mercenary showboating of billionaires' largess. To me, it's an odd situation that a very public crypto flameout would somehow bring up the topic of effective altruism, a type of philanthropic giving that has a focus on using outcomes and efficacy as an evidence base in order to look at one's charitable giving return on investment, ROI. The approach is not based on billionaires or the rich, although there are guidelines and organizations for those folks, such as the Founders Pledge, which allows founders of startups, I guess they're good starters, to choose what percentage, starting at 2%, that they will donate when they sell their company. One for the World asks its student members to pledge the undemanding 1% of their post-graduation income. Pledge 1% similarly asks companies to devote 1% of their resources to charities. And the well-known Giving Pledge, taken by billionaires to commit to giving away half their wealth either during their lives or in their will. Some have opined that effective altruism has now lost some of its appeal and not a trivial amount of its credibility, based in no small part to Sam Brinkman-Fried's hijinks with FTX. Nicholas Coolish, writing in the New York Times, reported that SBF, as he often goes by, was a proponent and donor of the effective altruism movement, and as a result of his bankruptcy filing, those involved in effective altruism are asking themselves whether they might have inadvertently helped burnish his reputation. This is especially stinging as SBF was not a vocal supporter of effective altruism. He was a donor. Well, sort of. It turns out that he gave funds to groups including the news organizations ProPublica, for example, a $5 million grant, Vox and Intercept, according to Coolish. And those funds seem to have vaporized along with investors' real dollars, and it looks likely that there are many committed grants that the Future Fund will be unable to honor. Furthermore, in October, SBF's FTX Foundation reported that while monies were donated, it is unclear how much of that money made it to the recipients and how much was earmarked for giving installments over several years. Asked whether he had set up any kind of endowment for his giving, Mr. Bankman-Fried said in the Times interview last month, It's more of a pay-as-we-go kind of thing. And the reason for that, frankly, is I'm not liquid enough for it to make sense to do an endowment right now." Close quote. And now the nonprofits that were counting on his promised backing are, quote, scrambling to replace millions in grant commitments from Mr. Bankman-Fried's charitable vehicles, close quote. It appears that at this point, the most of the grants went to groups focused on building effective altruist movement rather than organizations working directly on causes. This kind of thing really flips my switch, as I have frequently spoken and written about what William Easterly refers to as the power of the small project. Basically, many non-governmental, philanthropic, charitable, and nonprofit organizations that become successful seem to have a similar arc of evolution. That is, they bring in more funds, budgets start to shift to more dollars going to support the institutional infrastructure and corporate growth, and less to the work itself. I spent a year as a special representative working at the United Nations, and I saw many examples of this. Ditto when one looks at the history of other comparable institutions. In an op-ed, the Wall Street Journal's James Pareto noted that the perspective of Lewis Cullman, a fellow with great street cred of having donated hundreds of millions of dollars, which is strikingly similar to Easterly's observation concerning large organizations, Cullman thinks that private foundations exist primarily for their own self-perpetuation. Evidence for this may lie in what happened during the last recession. The Foundation Center surveyed over 100,000 foundations during that time and found an 8.4% drop in giving. He notes that this was the worst drop, adjusted for inflation, ever recorded. The logic basic to philanthropy would be that during times of the most need, the most help would be given, not diminished. To Cullman, this is proof positive that some foundation administrators are more concerned about the size of their nest eggs rather than about their philanthropic mission. It's not a big surprise that many advocacy groups call for greater transparency and reforms. But I digress. The moral to this story of immoral shenanigans is that SBF was courting favor while wearing a halo of altruism as a way to gain credibility and acceptance from investors, customers, and the world at large, so it would seem. The well-known philosopher William McCaskill and de facto godfather of the effective altruism movement tweeted, "If that goodwill laundered fraud, I am ashamed." Virtuewashing. Once you have the cash, goodwill laundering. It used to be nefarious folk atoned for their sins and past villainism by being humbled, sincerely atoning, sans press releases and media events, and sometimes doing things like writing beautiful hymns like Amazing Grace. But Benjamin Soskis observed that many newly rich donors leverage their donations in order to, quote, gain legitimization from their status as philanthropists, and there's a huge amount of incentive to allow them to call the shots and gain prominence as long as the money is flowing, close quote. It should be no surprise that Elon Musk has become another embarrassing supporter of effective altruism. And in a similar vein, V-A-I-N, my hero Scott Galloway went bananas on his podcast recently about Sheryl Sandberg's $3 million donation to the ACLU earmarked to support their efforts against abortion bans. Galloway's issues were based on two things. First, the timing, less than 3 days after leaving Meta. And second, while it was one of the largest donations of its kind, he felt that it seemed more born from a desire to repair her reputation, as he sees her work at Meta as serving there as the most effective heat shield in history from the mendacious effery of corporate America. Ouch, Scott. And considers her donation to be the mother of all virtue signaling. Then he did the math. To quote him, Sheryl's net worth is $1.5 billion, and a $3 million donation from her, as in 0.2% of her net worth, is the equivalent to an average American family, which has a median net worth of $122,000, giving $240, close quote. While he notes that philanthropy of any amount is a good thing, he also calls out that, quote, there's a difference, and that is when a household gives $240 to a charity, they don't issue a press release and start doing press conferences and posing for the camera. This isn't philanthropy. This is the equivalent of the proverbial Joneses spending that amount on bronzer or eyeliner or makeup, or it's a tie or a pocket square, close quote. Writing in an acerbic op-ed for the New York Times, Amand Gerhandis called out Jeff Bezos for his Jekyll and Hyde routine around the recent generosity pose, noting that he would be giving the bulk of his more than $120 billion fortune away with a focus on fighting climate change and promoting unity. But Mr. Bezos is now magnanimously distributing what he has made through his dehumanizing labor practices, his tax avoidance, his influence peddling, his monopolistic power, and other tactics that make him a cause of the problems of modern American life rather than a swashbuckling solution. Their wealth is so vast that by distributing even a small fraction of it, they skew the public agenda towards a kind of social change they can stomach, the kind that doesn't threaten them or their class. Close quote. Easy for me to say. That gets me so shook up. Close quote. That's quite different from his ex's approach, Mackenzie Scott, and she was noted by Forbes to have, quote, donated $5.8 billion to 500 different groups across the country in 2020. Last year, she continued giving her fortune away faster than any billionaire ever. Respect, Mackenzie. Respect. The sting of moral clarity. I don't mean to have such a pardon me, needed to get a sip of coffee there. I don't mean to have such a Machiavellian view as to charitable motivations or to join in the moral carpet bombing from 10,000 feet. I'm reprising a title of a related piece I wrote of the same name, Giving to the Need, which isn't a new concept by any means. Many forms of religions require doing so, of donation and contribution. Judaism has a traditional tithe, or 10% of their income. The Roman Catholic natural law teachings about the standard of giving everything one has in superabundance to those unable to find enough to eat or similarly meet basic needs. Muslims are required to give each year 1/40th of their wealth, with a rate varying according to the type of assets one has. Protestants are more likely to tithe, justifying their choice by the words of Jesus, as reporting in the Gospel writers Matthew and Luke. For example, Luke 12:48 notes that to whom much has been given, much will be required, which is generally considered to mean that we are held responsible for what we have. If we've been blessed with talents, wealth, knowledge, time, and the like, it's expected that we then use those to the benefit of others. Philosopher Peter Senge further notes in his book, The Life You Can Save, that for millennia, wise people have said that doing good things brings fulfillment. Buddha advised his followers, set your heart on doing good. Do it over and over again, and you will be filled with joy. Socrates and Plato taught us that the just man is happy. Epicurus wrote, it's impossible to live the pleasant life without also living sensibly, notably, and justly. Singer believes that we all have a moral obligation to be charitable, no matter what our income level. In 2016, Singer wrote an article in the New York Times Magazine titled, What Should a Billionaire Give, and What Should You? Which simply asks, what should a billionaire give to charity? What should we non-billionaires ostensibly give? How do we calculate these numbers? And of course, he lets us know that those amounts are able to be calculated, and basically there is an amount of money one needs to live a decent life, to pay for a reasonable amount of rent, clothes, food, shelter, leisure. And if you have more than that amount, he posited, you should give it away because you don't need it, and someone else does. This past summer, I interviewed Singer's partner, Charlie Bressler, and he discussed Singer's giving scale, which is a helpful guide. It ranges from 1% for those with adjusted gross incomes between $40,000 and $81,000 to 50% for the top 0.001% of U.S. taxpayers who have incomes of more than $53 million a year, which seems fair, right? So check in the show notes and you'll see a link to that and what that looks like. For me, in running a global health nonprofit, I have found myself spending a fair amount of time cogitating on the supply side of humanitarian work, philanthropy. I've previously written about the topic, philanthropy for the rest of us, and spoken about the giving pledge. A popular meme in the business literature references Schumpeter's famously attributed philosophy of creative destruction. It got me to thinking, what if we applied this concept to philanthropic institutions? That is, what if such organizations made it their goal to spin themselves down completely? Would that be a bad thing? The Gates Foundation has a self-imposed sunsetting over a 50-year spin down. The Aaron Diamond Foundation is another example of a limited-term foundation. It awarded over $20 million and has spent itself down between 1987 and 1996. I was at a TED conference a long time ago, and first heard Zoe Baird's plans as then the new president of the Markle Foundation, to increase the foundation's amount of spending. Indeed, U.S. regulations require a minimum annual distribution of 5% of their endowment, but paradoxically, it's treated like it's the maximum. Overhead can be as high as 20%, and I suspect that too may wind up being maxed out. In my research for the Bressler interview, I read a piece in a recent issue of Forbes on America's top givers. It was pretty much what you'd expect. Billionaires giving billions, which is great. Some notable points popped up, though. And from this Forbes list, quote, 17 of them have signed the giving pledge, promising to donate at least half of their fortune to charity over their lifetimes or upon their deaths. But only 2, Chuck Feeney and Soros, who actually has not signed the giving pledge, have hit the mark. Close quote. So that caught my eye. So I ran a quick calculation based on the reported numbers, and I simply divided lifetime donation amount of the top 12 listed by their current net worth. I've got a box in the notes, so please do take a look at that. So when you do, take a look at Chuck Feeney's results. He's not a billionaire or even a multimillionaire. Nevertheless, he ranked 6th. So get this. He's given away 4,000%. 4,000%. The guy and his wife have $2 million left to live on, while having given away $8 billion. Holy smokes, Chuck. You are an inspiration. And then P.S., take a look at what I learned about his background and whatnot. He's a pretty cool guy. Peter's principles. The idea that levels of giving that Peter Singer talks about in his giving scale would not be a significant hardship on anyone. Although at the lower income levels, this would depend on an individual's circumstances. While not everyone can give an annual lump sum donation, everyone can make a difference. If you need some pointers on how to get started, the good people at The Life You Can Save have published a number of resources, and I've got links for that. Leaving a gift in your will is one of the best things you can do to save and improve lives. You can download their free wills guide and see the details for bequests. You can donate stock or mutual funds to The Life You Can Save or to one of their recommended charities. A monthly donation makes giving accessible to everyone. A small donation makes a huge difference, and there may be an opportunity to take advantage of their matching donation campaign for recurring donations. And I've got a list with links for their full list of donation options. Role modeling, for goodness sakes. Peter walks the talk as he's donated all of his $1 million Brueggen Prize money, and also in the spirit of role modeling and being transparent as to giving and not peacocking, I have a link of what I have personally done. I'm trying to put my money where my mouth and my heart is. There's a lot of need in the world, and there's a great number of people and ethical organizations that are doing their part to make a difference. What if each of us committed to our #BigIdeas2023 to step up our charitable game? What a wonderful and meaningful difference it would make in the lives of others in 2023 and beyond. Perhaps we can take a look at our resolutions, our budgets, and ourselves and consider if we are doing all that we can and should for others. As Jack London wrote, "A bone to a dog is not charity. Charity is the bone shared with the dog. when you are just as hungry as the dog. Thanks for listening.